Jeff Bezos has paid almost no income tax in years where his net worth grew by tens of billions of dollars. Elon Musk did the same in 2018, 2020, and 2022. They used a strategy called buy, borrow, die. Right now, if you search for that strategy on YouTube, you'll find at least a dozen channels telling you to use it on your $3 million. The strategy is real. It works exactly the way those videos describe. And for households at your level, it's one of the most dangerous pieces of financial advice circulating in 2026. Not because the math is fake, because the math only works in one direction, and your direction isn't it. In the next 13 minutes, I'll walk you through exactly how buy, borrow, die works at a billionaire scale, the 3 conditions that have to be met for the math to come out positive, and why all 3 of those conditions reversed against you when you try to run the same strategy on $3 million. Then I'll show you the 3 legitimate strategies that capture the same underlying instinct, accessing your wealth without triggering massive tax bills, that actually work at your asset level. They're not as exciting as never selling a share, but they're substantially more reliable for people in your asset level. If you have $2 to $5 million saved, you're approaching or in retirement, and you've heard of buy, borrow, die, and wondered if you could pull it off, this video is specifically for you, especially if any part of you has ever wondered whether you should be doing it. You're wealthy enough that the conventional retirement advice no longer applies cleanly to your situation. You're not wealthy enough that the billionaire tax strategies apply to you either. There's a middle band of techniques built specifically for $2 to $5 million households, and almost nobody talks about it because there's no viral hook attached to careful planning. Today, that comparison is the entire video. I'm Ryan Knoll, founder of Nav Wealth Partners. We specialize in helping retirees with $2 to $5 million pay fewer taxes in retirement. In the last 6 months, we've had clients ask us about buy, borrow, die more times than any other strategy. It's the most asked about non-traditional technique in our practice right now. And the honest answer for almost every household we run the math for is this isn't built for you, and here's what is. Let me show you why. Buy, borrow, die in plain language has 3 parts. Buy, you accumulate concentrated positions in growth assets with low cost basis. For Bezos, that's his original Amazon shares. They're bought at pennies on the dollar, now worth hundreds of dollars each. The cost basis stays locked at the price you originally paid. Next is borrow. Instead of selling shares when you need cash for living expenses, you take a margin loan or a securities-based line of credit against these positions. The brokerage lends you cash using the appreciated stock as collateral. You spend the cash, you owe interest on the loan, but you never actually sold a share, so you never triggered a capital gains tax event. And then finally, when you die, your heirs receive the underlying positions with a stepped-up cost basis. The decades of appreciation that accumulated during your lifetime are now invisible for tax purposes. Your heirs sell enough shares to pay off the outstanding loan balance at the new stepped-up basis and pocket the rest with no capital gains tax owed on the appreciation that happened while you were alive. That's the strategy. It's real, it's legal, and for households at billions of dollars in scale, it works exactly as advertised. Decades of compounding wealth accessed for living expenses without ever paying income tax on the gains, then transferred to heirs with the income tax permanently erased. You can see why the strategy is appealing. You can see why it's gone viral on YouTube. The promise of spend without ever selling a share and your kids inherit tax-free is genuinely the holy grail of tax planning. The question isn't whether the strategy works. It does work. The question is whether the math works at your asset level. Almost none of the videos circulating online address that question. Let me show you why it matters. For buy, borrow, die to actually save you money, not just delay taxes but produce a better lifetime outcome, 3 conditions all have to be met. Not 1, not 2, all 3. Condition 1, your portfolio's growth rate has to reliably exceed your borrowing costs by a meaningful spread. At Bezos' scale, his Amazon stock is compounded at roughly 25% per year over 30 years. His effective margin borrowing rate is around 5%. That's a 20 percentage point spread. Every dollar borrowed grows 20 cents net of interest every single year automatically. For a $3 million household, the portfolio is usually diversified across stocks and bonds. So the typical 60-40 portfolio might return 6 to 8%, roughly a third of Bezos' growth rate. Margin rates at retail brokerage firms, they run about 7 to 9% if your account's under $1 million, and they drop from that number to about 5 to 7% for larger accounts. The spread between portfolio return and borrowing cost is either zero or negative. Over a 30-year retirement, it averages to break even at best. So condition 1 already fails for most households with $2 to $5 million. But let's assume you pass that condition, and we'll move on to condition 2 now. Your balance sheet has to be able to absorb a 50% drawdown without triggering a margin call. When you borrow against your portfolio, the brokerage requires you to maintain a certain ratio of equity to debt. If the market drops and your equity falls below that ratio, the brokerage doesn't ask politely. They automatically liquidate positions to bring the ratio back into compliance at whatever price they can get, usually at the bottom of the market. At Bezos' scale, the loan balance is a tiny fraction of the underlying portfolio. He could absorb a 90% drawdown and still have plenty of cushion. A $3 million household scale, if you've drawn $300,000 to $500,000 against a $1 million brokerage account, you've already used 30 to 50% of your equity as collateral. The brokerage force liquidates your position at the worst possible time. This isn't theoretical. It happened to thousands of margin loan retirees in 2008. It happened again in 2022. The strategy that works for billionaires because their balance sheets are unshakable becomes a leveraged bet against the market for everyone else. And finally, condition 3. Your estate has to meaningfully benefit from stepped up basis to close the loop. The die part of the strategy is what completes the tax savings. For Bezos, this is enormous. He's avoiding income tax on tens of billions of appreciation across decades. For a $3 million household, the math is much smaller. The federal estate tax exemption in 2026 is $15 million per person, and almost every $3 million household passes assets to heirs entirely free of that, regardless of the strategy. The stepped-up basis will still apply, though, and that's a separate provision, but the dramatic dollar savings that drive the strategy at billionaire scale aren't there. You spent 10 or 20 years paying margin interest at 7% to capture tax savings the audience size doesn't actually realize. 3 conditions, all required. Bezos has all 3. Most $3 million households almost never have any of them. That's the structural reason the strategy works in one direction and fails in the other. Let me walk you through what actually happens to a typical $3 million household that tries to run this strategy. A 64-year-old retired couple with $1 million in a taxable brokerage account and the other $2 million in retirement accounts. They need about $100,000 per year for living expenses beyond their Social Security and pension. They watch a YouTube video. They decide to take a margin loan instead of selling their shares. And their margin rate, let's just say it's 7%. So year 1, they borrow $100,000. Interest cost is $7,000. And assume that they capitalize that onto their loan, meaning they don't make interest payments, so it's just added to the balance for simplicity of the example. In actuality, you might want to consider making those interest payments, but just for simplicity, we're going to assume it's capitalized. They saved roughly $15,000 in capital gains tax by not selling, so call this a net positive of $8,000 for year 1. And at an 8% growth rate, the account is worth $1,080,000 by the end of the year. Now year 2. They borrow another $100,000. The new balance is $207,000, the original $200,000 plus accumulated interest. Annual interest is now about $15,000, so the total loan balance is $222,000. Cumulative capital gains tax avoided in this instance about $30,000. They're still positive by around $8,000. Their account value has grown to $1.17 million. Year 3, balance is now $322,000 to start the year. Interest cost this year is another $22,000. So the cumulative balance at this point in time is $344,000. And they've avoided tax of roughly $45,000. So they're right at break even, just slightly better. And the account value at the end of the year is $1.25 million. So now we enter year 4, and this is going to be a little bit different. The account starts the year at $1.25 million. The couple borrows another $100,000. So the total balance is $445,000. But this is the year that the market drops 35% and we're in a recession. Their portfolio is now worth $812,000. The brokerage's maintenance margin is 50%, meaning that their total loan balance is more than 50% of their portfolio. They will be forced to sell securities to get back to 50% or less. They get the call. They can either deposit cash or sell shares to reduce the loan balance. They don't have spare cash because they've been spending what they're borrowing. The brokerage liquidates $39,000 of positions at depressed prices. So it's not the end of the world, but severely limiting how they use this strategy moving forward. They also book capital gains on the forced sales at the worst possible moment. So by year 5, let's say the market recovers a bit and their portfolio is back to $900,000. After their margin call, the principal balance is reduced to roughly $400,000. At 7% interest, they had $28,000 capitalized onto the loan. So the total loan balance in this instance is $428,000. On the $900,000 total account balance, they're able to borrow $450,000, or that 50% maintenance margin. So they can pull out a whopping $22,000 before they are tapped out again. And now they're a small market correction away from being forced to sell again. And this is where they get into trouble, because even a 5 or 10% small market correction is going to cause them huge capital gains realization and completely destroy their strategy. Now, this isn't even the worst case scenario. This is what happens when you run a strategy designed for unshakable balance sheets on a household balance sheet that has to survive market cycles. The strategy works for Bezos because he can absorb any drawdown breaks, but the household can't. And if your situation looks anything like this couple's, $2 to $5 million saved, planning to spend on a brokerage account during retirement, this is the math sitting underneath any version of buy, borrow, die you're considering. Now, I'll be honest with you, the reason buy, borrow, die has been circulating so heavily on YouTube and on financial social media isn't because anyone is running the math for $3 million households. It's because the strategy makes for great content. Spend without ever having to sell a share is a viral hook. The video gets clicks, the creator profits. The audience watching that video is mostly $2 to $5 million pre-retirees who don't realize the math behind the hook reverses at their asset level. Nobody in those videos walks through the 3 conditions. Nobody compares margin interest to the actual after-tax cost of selling. Nobody models what happens in a drawdown. Most of the prospective clients who come into my practice asking about this strategy have heard it from one of 2 places: a YouTuber who's selling them a course on it, or a friend who's heard it from a YouTuber who's selling a course on it. Almost nobody has done the math themselves. The math isn't hard, but it isn't fun, and the people producing the viral content don't have an incentive to publish the version where the strategy fails. That's what frustrates me about how this corner of personal finance content works. Strategies that genuinely apply to $100 million plus portfolios get repackaged for audiences at $5 million. And the people hurt by the repackaging are the ones who can least afford to be wrong about a retirement strategy. You deserve advice that distinguishes between Bezos' balance sheet and yours. Let me show you the 3 strategies that actually work at your asset level and capture the same underlying instinct that makes buy, borrow, die appealing. The underlying instinct behind buy, borrow, die is correct. You should be looking for ways to access your wealth without triggering massive tax bills. That's a real planning goal at this asset level. The instinct just needs to be channeled into strategies that actually work on your balance sheet. 3 strategies do exactly that. Strategy 1 is Roth Conversion Architecture during the bracket fill window. In your low bracket years between retirement and required minimum distribution starting, convert pre-tax dollars to Roth at known controllable rates. Pay tax once at 22 or 24%, then never pay tax on those dollars again. Not on growth, not on withdrawals, not when they pass to your heirs. This is the legitimate version of the buy, borrow, die instinct. Pay tax once at a low rate, then never again. No margin interest, no drawdown risk, no reliance on dying at the right moment for the math to work. And now the second strategy, direct indexed tax loss harvesting in your brokerage account. Instead of borrowing against your brokerage to avoid selling, restructure how the brokerage holds the index. Direct indexing harvests $15,000 to $40,000 per year in realized losses without changing your overall market exposure at a $1 million portfolio level. Those losses offset capital gains you'd otherwise pay on rebalancing, on Roth conversions, and on any future selling. It's the same instinct, reduce taxes on accessing wealth, done through harvesting losses rather than borrowing against gains. Works at $3 million because the math doesn't depend on growth rate exceeding your interest rate. We have many other videos on the channel that walk through it in full if you want to go check them out. Now, the third strategy is a strategic step-up basis management on the brokerage. This is the legitimate die component for the $3 million households. Don't borrow against the brokerage during your life. Don't sell it down either. Hold the most appreciated positions until death. Fund your living expenses from the traditional IRA and Roth through the strategies above. Let the brokerage's embedded gains compound untouched. At death, your heirs receive the brokerage with the step-up basis. That accumulated tax-free during your lifetime transfer with zero capital gains tax owed. This captures the actual valuable piece of the buy, borrow, die, the step up at death, without margin loan risk, linked below as well in other videos that we have covered. 3 strategies all work at $3 million. All 3 capture the underlying instinct that makes buy, borrow, die appealing. None require borrowing against your portfolio at margin rates that wipe out the savings when the market eventually corrects. If you want to see how these 3 strategies fit together as a coordinated plan, not as standalone tactics, I put together a free retirement income architecture blueprint. All 3 strategies sit inside it. Link in the description below. This tool will help you see how these 3 strategies are more sustainable than buy, borrow, die at your asset level. The wealthiest investors really do spend without selling, just not the way YouTube tells you to copy. At Bezos' scale, 3 conditions line up perfectly: high growth rate, unshakable balance sheet, and a meaningful estate tax exposure. All 3 every time. The strategy works because the math actually applies to his situation. At $3 million, those 3 conditions almost never line up. The growth rate is understandably lower. The balance sheet can't absorb a margin call, and estate tax exposure usually doesn't exist at the federal level, absence of some sort of inheritance down the line. The strategy fails not because it's a bad strategy, but because it's the wrong strategy for your balance sheet. You're wealthy enough that the right strategies exist and produce real lifetime tax savings, not wealthy enough to copy the techniques built for portfolios 50 times larger than yours. The 3 alternatives I just walked through, Roth Conversion Architecture, direct indexed harvesting, and strategic step-up basis management, each have a full deep dive on this channel. Together, they're the actual $3 million household toolkit. If you've been wondering whether buy, borrow, die belongs in your plan, there's a link in the description to my team's calendar. We'll run the 3 conditions, test on your specific situation. In the rare case where it makes sense, and it does happen, just not often, we'll show you the structure. In every other case, we'll show you which of the 3 alternatives belongs instead, or which combination belongs instead. The right strategy for your retirement is the one that works on your balance sheet, not the one that works on someone else's. See you next week.